Claire Looper was a teacher and civil rights leader. Looper taught history and public relations at Dungy High School in Spencer, Oklahoma, and at John Marshall and Classen High Schools in Oklahoma City. While teaching, Looper wrote, directed, and produced Brother President, a play based on the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Looper became the advisor for the Oklahoma City National Association for the Advancement of Colored People Youth Council in 1957. The following year, the Youth Council decided to stage a sit-in at Oklahoma City's Cash Drug Store. On August 19th, 1958, walking into the store, ordering cokes, the youth under Looper's guidance demonstrated their discontent with segregation and launched the nation's sit-in movement. The Youth Council continued to conduct sit-ins throughout the early 1960s and helping to end segregation and public accommodations in Oklahoma. Maintaining her adherence in nonviolence, Looper participated in marches and demonstrations and was often jailed in her civil rights struggle. Looper has received over 154 awards, including Langston Alumni Award, Zeta Phi Beta Women of the Year Award, the Oklahoma Confederated Women's Club Award, and the National Voters Registration Award. Looper was also inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame in 2007. Ralph Ellison was a novelist. Ellison wrote The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man won the National Book Award in 1953 for fiction. This established Ellison to be one of the most important American authors in the 20th century. The Invisible Man is about a black youth who goes to Harlem, joins the fight against white oppression, and ends up ignored by his fellow blacks and whites. The novel won praise for its stylistic innovations, infusing classic literary motifs with modern black speech and culture, while providing a thoroughly unique take on the construction of contemporary African American identity. Ellison later published a few short stories. Before his death, he left a second novel unfinished called Juneteenth. A shorter version was published in 1999. The selected letters of Ralph Ellison were released in 2019. Ellison was inducted into Oklahoma Hall of Fame in 2002. Ellison also has a library named after him in Oklahoma City. Russell Perry is a businessman and politician. Perry was the first African-American Secretary of Commerce for the state of Oklahoma. Perry owns the Black Chronicle newspaper, which is one of the largest paid weekly newspapers in the state of Oklahoma. Perry also owns Perry Publishing and Broadcasting, the largest privately held African-American-owned radio broadcasting company in the United States. With the headquarters being in Oklahoma City, Perry owns 22 radio stations across the country. Perry has brought more diverse radio and newspaper outlets to the state of Oklahoma. Russell Perry also is in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, the Oklahoma Broadcasters Hall of Fame, the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame, and the Oklahoma City Public Schools Wall of Fame. Perry is also recognized by Oklahoma City by naming a street after him. Well, Dad, I wanted to ask you some questions about a few black leaders, Claire Looper, Russell Perry, and Ralph Ellison. And my first question for you is, what was it like doing business with Claire Looper?
First of all, good evening, Miles. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Dad. How are you?
I'm just honored to be here, man. My guy. Claire Looper, dynamic lady. She was committed to for the betterment of humankind, but she was really committed to doing business with blacks. If blacks offered the same type of services and they were good services, she would always deal with blacks. I know we live in a world where you're supposed to do business with everyone, but it was really cool to interact and deal with her because everything she fought for equality, she was always committed to that. And she's committed to trying to do business with people who look like her. Everyone, but people with her. 405-424-3949. That's her phone number. And she used to always call me, and I would see it on my call ID. I knew that was Miss Looper.
That's pretty cool. And my second question is, how has Claire Looper, Russell Perry, and Ralph Ellison helped shape OKC of today?
Oh, dynamic. I think all three of them had their own special way of doing that. One thing that you stop and look about them, they were all leaders in their own right and respect. All made an imprint that lasts not only in Oklahoma City and the state of Oklahoma, but nationally. Ralph Ellison from the arts and being an author and writing. Claire Looper from civil rights from a city, state, local, and a national perspective. And then Russell Perry, your namesake, he's done the same from a city, state, as well as national, arts, music, writing, literature, the whole nine. So they have a lot of things in common. And their common goal was the betterment of everyone, but targeting blacks to show where blacks were equal with everyone.
Yes. And my final question for you is, how did they all impact your life?
Well, as a kid, Ralph Ellison, growing up here, Northeast 23rd and MLK, he impacted my life because I didn't know who Ralph Ellison was as a kid, but I knew that was the library. Then I found out what it was in his book, The Invisible Man, which you and Dad talked about. So that impacted me because that's really, really what a dynamic name of his book and what that book represented. So he represented me as a black man being an invisible man. I get it and I understand it, and we're moving forward today. Claire Looper impacted my life because when I stopped, you hear about who you're interacting with and what kind of legend she was, but to be able to say that I really knew Miss Looper, what a pleasure. And she really inspired me in her way of things that can be done and accomplished. And then your namesake, Russell Perry. Man, my best friend. He has been, I'm a blessed man to have the kind of father I have as my best friend, a leader, and then I work for him. He's my boss. So he's impacted me and showed me life that I could only dream of and read about and watch a movie about. So I'm very blessed with that. Then I ended up getting you and your brother Sebastian, and I better mention your mama too, because I'm glad she said I do, right?
Yes. Well, Dad, thank you for doing this, and I hope everything goes well with work and Papa.
I appreciate it.
Since my first question I was going to ask you
Sure.
is that you were recognized by Senator Langford last year in the Senate Hall in D.C.
Yes, forgotten about that, yes.
on the Senate floor, and I was going to ask you, how'd that make you feel? Because he considered you as a black leader, and my dad is a black leader in the state of Oklahoma. How'd that make you feel?
It makes me feel honored, for United States Senator from Oklahoma would recognize me and your father as leaders, and it was a compliment, and it made me feel extremely well.
And after the next question I have for you is, what impact do you think Claire Looper had on Oklahoma City during her time?
She was, she made a significant impact on this city by showing the ills that exist in this city. She did it during a time and a period that it was going on nationwide, but she made an impression here that I feel didn't get the national recognition that it should have during that period of time. Since she has passed on, I think this generation, the existing generation that we live in today, that's a part of our history today, recognize her efforts. And now you see a beginning of that recognition by the buildings and so forth is being named after, and I'm glad to see that.
Yes, sir. And you said you didn't feel like you had a lot to do with the civil rights movement, and you weren't a part of that time. What did it take to survive during that time, though, since you were a part of it, but not in the movement?
Well, the reason for me saying I wasn't a part of it is that I was not an activist.
Yes.
I during that period, at the peak of the Oklahoma City sanitation strike, is when it was a national event. People came in, activists came in from all over the country to support this that movement. And the reason for me saying that, I was working during the time.
Yes.
And so I looked and witnessed everything that was happening, but no, I was not physically involved in it.
Okay. And
Does that make sense?
that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Papa, Ralph Ellison, he's very big in Oklahoma City. He has his own library named after him on the east side. And he also went to a graduate from Douglas High School like you. So when you went to Douglas, did any of their teachers mention or talk about Ralph Ellison at the time?
Very seldom. I knew Ralph Ellison and his wife, and they were subscribers to my newspaper. And that's not answering your question, but
Yes.
I knew them. And he was a subscriber to my newspaper until he died. But no, he wasn't mentioned, but my mentor was Jimmy Stewart, who was a writer here for the Black Dispatch newspaper when I worked there. And he and Ralph Ellison were personal friends. They were of the same age, and they lived basically in the same area. So I would sit down and talk to Jimmy a great deal about Ralph Ellison, and in the book, his book, I can't think of the title now, just served him well, and I think it was the beginning of his notoriety because his book sold so well.
And Pablo, this question is probably the first question I have about your business life.
Mm-hmm.
But when you first entered the business world, you've always told me and my family and Sebastian about how you know, it was a struggle for you at first, but what do you remember the first times you were helped in the business world? But
Do I remember the first time I was helped?
yes, they get going.
Yes. You mean for myself?
Yes, sir.
Yes. First of all, doctor's own, and I decided that I would go out on my own, and came in and talked to my wife, and we decided that I would go out on my own. And you asked me if the difficulties there. I had $12,500 in the bank, and in my projections that I needed at least $125,000 to $150,000 to get it started with equipment and personnel. And I went to the bank. Nate Ross was president of this bank, and he was former city manager of Oklahoma City. And so Nate and I ticked it off, and his words to me was, when I went in and asked to borrow the money, number one, what is your collateral? And I told him all I had was a house and a house full of furniture and $12,500 in his bank. And so his words to me, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Well, Russell, we do not know these two doctors, but we know that you've been in and out of this bank, and you've been a customer of ours personally for a long time, and that's within my legal limit. And if you're willing to put up your house and other things for collateral, we'll loan you the money, $125,000. And I did. So I leveraged everything I owned. With the approval of my wife, she agreed, and I never will forget. I asked her, I said, what if I lose? Yeah, she said, we'll start all over again. We'll just move into an apartment and start all over again. And so that was my inspiration, that I had to make it.